Hey guys! So today we are going to address something that I think we need to talk about, just you and me. And that is this question, which I get, or rather, it's not a question. Well, it is a question, but more of a statement. Why don't you just use blank? So that's what we're going to talk about. Let's get into it. Now, why don't you use blank? And blank in this context means absolutely any technology you can possibly imagine that somebody thought of that will, in their mind, solve your problem. Now, I'll give you a great concrete example of this. So the other day I was just looking through some comments and an old video of mine which addresses a common performance problem that you may face when you're using something like React, for example. I can kind of touch on the issue at hand. And one of the first comments there is, why don't you use MobX instead of Redux to manage your state? Now this person has stated it's a good question. I think that maybe my communication wasn't all that great because MobX in this scenario will not necessarily solve this problem for me. So I'm actually going to make a video and see if I can illustrate the issue rather the point I was trying to make. But what's interesting is that the first response was, why don't you use blank? And I have had several others where, why don't you, oh, you're using Express and you have these issues here, why don't you use Happy? Why don't you use Sales? Okay, well, why don't you use Java? Why don't you use C#? Why don't you use C? Like these sorts of questions. And you see, the reason why I want to touch on this is because fundamentally, when you ask that question, and I used to do that too. I'm going to be honest, I used to be, when I was like completely fresh out of school and I had started at my first real like major company, I had a very similar approach to things. I looked at what was there and I asked, why don't we use that? Because this is much better. Why don't I use that? This is much better. And I kind of went through that over and over and over. And let me tell you guys why that question is, let me tell you why that question is a little bit odd and very often a little bit naive and mostly asked by, in my experience, either people who have not thought what they're asking, who've thought things through, or they are of a more junior profile. I'm not saying that you are just because you asked that question. I'm just trying to set a context here. So the reason why you don't use, in this case, why we don't use MobX is because the entire application is tied into Redux. That's your answer right there. Why are we not using MobX instead of Redux? Well, because somebody made a decision a while back to go with Redux, and now there are literally hundreds of thousands of lines of code tied into that specific solution, and that's why we don't just switch it out, because it's very costly. It's extremely costly. It's going to take several days at least, and a lot of testing and a lot of, well, basically doing something like that instead of shipping features or producing value for our users. Now, that sort of cost is not something that a lot of people want to pay. A lot of companies don't want to pay that. And that's why you don't switch A for B. And this is one of the main reasons why I keep telling everybody who tells me that, say in CSS, that, oh, you can just use a polyfill for that, or why do I need to learn that instead, because I'm just going to use this instead. And I go, yeah, sure, tell yourself that. You can keep on telling yourself that, if you haven't been all that long in the industry, you have this idea that, and it seems kind of odd because now that I think back on it, it feels odd that I even thought this way, because I used to think that way as well. Like, just think about it. Why do you think that you have any say in the tools that your company is going to use? Maybe you do. Maybe you start from scratch and then you can pick exactly what you want to work with. But if a company has already established a working pattern that revolves a certain suite of tools, then you don't really have the option of just coming in on day one and saying, hey, this isn't as good as it could be. Let's migrate everything over to the next thing. It's not that common. And that's why you need to learn how to not only work with legacy code, you need to learn how to work with libraries that you may not find to be the best. I mean, when I started out with React, Redux wasn't established as the main thing. I think we used something called Reflow or something at my first company, and then of course Redux kind of takes off and becomes the super popular thing, and now everybody wants to migrate over to Redux, but we can't because, to put it simply, the company wants to be productive, and I mean Reflow or so forth, it was working for us. It wasn't necessary, it was just not the thing that we wanted. But that doesn't mean that we can simply be irresponsible and say that we have to migrate things. So I think it's important, and this is honestly why I think that, especially in JavaScript land, this is why it's a little bit, it's tough, especially in JavaScript, to be the sort of person who can keep track of it all. Because this is something I've touched on before, where I think that when you've been working for a while, you will know this to be true. You will know that you don't always have the option of just saying that, hey, this is the thing that I'm comfortable with, this is the thing I want, let's just use that. Because you don't. You usually have to work within the box or the boundaries that have already been set on the project that you start with. So that means that at the very least you have to have a working understanding of the possible tools. Not everything, of course, but it is very useful for you to know the common tools. Say in Java and C#, that environment is very narrow in comparison to the diversity that you see in JavaScript. So it's actually very comfortable for you as a developer, and very easy, if you will, to have a pretty good, general understanding of the sort of tools that you're most likely going to work with on basically any project. That is not true for JavaScript. And that diversity, although there's a lot of benefits that come with that to the platform and like the communities and so forth, it's a bit of a hassle to have this situation where you need to almost know, like you have to know like 100 different things that have very little correlation between each other, and you have to keep track of everything, because you may find that company A uses these 3, these 4, and the next company uses another set, and the third company uses another set, and so forth and so forth. And all that diversity, because everybody's using different things, puts a bit more pressure on you as a software developer or a front-end developer, whatever you want to call yourself, because you need to keep so much with you. Because as I said, and that's the thing I want you to take away from this, guys. If you think that statement, why don't you use this, has the easiest answer in the world, which is, oh, I'll just migrate things, then remember, next time you ask that question, why don't you use this, just use this instead? Well, because most likely something else has already taken its place, and you don't have the option of just switching that out for whatever you feel like. And when you have that situation, it gets really important for you, as I've said before, to have the ability to just actually learn the thing that is already there. Have a great day.